Hello and welcome to India's World, a show where we each week take a look at a different aspect of where India's foreign policy is heading and also the challenges ahead. Today we're turning our focus to Pakistan. Just last week, an anti-corruption court indicted ousted Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and his daughter over allegations linked to ownership of some London properties, opening a trial, in fact, that could see the former Prime Minister jailed. Well, this latest indictment is a follow-up to another indictment on the 19th of October that we saw. Needless to say, of course, there's immense pressure on the former Prime Minister, his family and his party, and perhaps the elite in Pakistan. To help us understand the situation, we have in studio today an esteemed panel. We've got Mr. G. Parthasarathy, former High Commissioner to Pakistan, joining us. We have Mr. Rana Banerji, former Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, and also Professor Pant, Distinguished Fellow and Head of ORF's Strategic Studies, joining us. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the show here. Mr. Parthasarathy, starting with you first, how are you assessing the situation that's developing? How tough is it looking for Nawaz Sharif?
You know, let me put it this way. The judiciary has always been dubious in Pakistan. They've justified every coup. But this is the first time that you had a judicial process where the investigators involved military officers who know nothing about the subject. And therefore, it is leading to a situation now where the military really calls the shots. General Bajwa goes to Afghanistan. Even what should be done with the Americans, everything is done directly with the military, including Mattis's greetings. So, this is a very important thing. And for the first time, the military is even treading into economic policy. So, in this situation, the military, as far as I can recall, they never got on with Nawaz. He was the only Punjabi politician who sort of tried to at least stand up to them. And therefore, what is happening is you are having to cut him to size apart from the trial, splits in the Muslim League, ruling Muslim League, and differences created between the Sharif family. Between his brother and himself, they've always worked together, though Shehbaz has been closer to the army. So you're into a dysfunctional, weakened government, a weakened political party, an army treading into financial matters. So it is really going to be an army-dominated setup, and I think nobody in the world should have any illusions. And I think we should bear that in mind as we move ahead.
Okay, so is this a military coup of a different kind? Do you agree with that, Mr. Banerji?
Well, people in Pakistan have defined it or are calling it a creeping coup. The difference, of course, is that the judiciary is being used as the shikhandi, so to speak, the shooting shoulder, and the military is operating from behind the scenes. In fact, Bajwa has denied that he had anything to do with the judiciary's decision. But the real problem for Nawaz Sharif, of course, he will be facing the indictment, he will be making appeals to the extent permissible to the higher courts. But the courts are seen to be having behaved in a rather biased manner against him, and independent legal opinion in Pakistan feels a little squeamish about this. But nevertheless, the process is likely to go ahead, and this might damage his position within his own party, and that is his real concern now. How to keep the party united or hang on, because numerically in the Senate and in the National Assembly, the position of PMLN is very comfortable. But in the Senate, they want to wait somehow till the Senate elections of March 2018, where the PMLN would then have a larger numerical majority. They have 27 seats out of 104 now. After March elections, if they are able to hold it in time, they will have 37 seats. So the possibility of moving some sort of an amendment to do away with the disqualifications under Article 62 of the Constitution of being dishonest or untruthful, which have been used to disqualify Nawaz, they could be diluted. That seems to be the calculation of the Nawaz group within the PMLN. Whereas the Shehbaz Sharif group and his son, they are taking a position that, well, if Nawaz has to go, then I am the natural successor, but only if Nawaz group backs him.
Yes.
So position is very, very uncertain as of now.
He's of course been having a lot of meetings. He's trying to of course speak to several leaders. Shehbaz Sharif, we understand, we keep seeing these reports of course of how he's trying to make sure there's no factionalism that takes place, internal politics. Of course, he's trying to keep a check on that. But Harsh, do you also agree that this is just a military-driven policy, a military-driven agenda against Nawaz Sharif, or as some reports were claiming that this is in fact a wake-up call for the elites in Pakistan, that, you know, if the military has a problem with you, then they can go at you, you know, and that too in a process which involves the judiciary, and it makes it look as if you are fighting against corruption, you are fighting, and that's the perception that is given to the wider public, at least. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think what you know, one has to look at it in the certain, you know, certainly in the broader context. What has certainly happened is that there was a government which was, for the first time, we saw democratic transition in Pakistan, and suddenly now there is a process underway to undermine the very authority of that government. And I think by focusing on an individual on a charge of corruption, which is popular, which society will lap up in certain ways, that, as you point out, you know, elites, corrupt elite versus military that is more perhaps this real guardian of the nation. And so that's a narrative that the Pakistani military you know, has used very well. And now, interestingly, they are back to it again, using judicial process or judiciary as an intermediary to sort of make a case that, look, the civilians are no good. You gave them a chance, but look at what they've done. So I think that this is a very interesting and complicated scenario that is emerging in Pakistan, where once, for example, the world was suggesting, look, this is the dawn of democracy in Pakistan. We are seeing strengthening of the democratic institutions. What we are now witnessing is a gradual erosion of the democratic ethos by the military, using certain other instrumentalities of the state. So I think it would be very interesting to see what happens now to the democratic ethos or to the institutions per se in Pakistan as they evolve, as they have evolved in the last few years. I think one of the problems we have had is that we'll tend to look at Pakistan primarily through this prism of the military. Somehow there was a move away from the military, and now we are back to a situation where military seems to be calling the shots, undermining an individual who was becoming relatively stronger over 2 successive elections.
And how does it also play out, you know, in a larger context as far as Pakistan's foreign policy is concerned? We saw, you know, China, of course, very openly, it has always supported Pakistan, but the past few years, you know, it has been quite open about its support to Pakistan, you know, and similarly, even with the US, the relations at the moment, it's dilly-dallying. I mean, it seems like, you know, something is not working in their favor, but at the same time, you have a Tillerson who's also going ahead, and his, you know, his speech so far has been warm in a sense, if you could call it, you know, to going towards Pakistan. Where is the foreign policy headed, and who are they going to be looking at when they try to talk to a certain government you know, person?
Having just come back 3 days ago from a 4-week stay in Washington, not very many people in Washington know which way the Trump foreign policy is going. But one thing is broadly clear if one gets talking to people, is that in the case of India, there is a broad consensus, and it's not just in the administration, more importantly in the US Congress, both political parties. India is one country where there's a political consensus on moving ahead. How much, how far is going to be left to Trump? But I think right now one has to wait and see how it plays out. Because from what one gathers, they will be much tougher as time goes by if their troops and the Afghans take heavy casualties. It's going to be primarily Kabul centered. And therefore, the focus is going to be there. All sorts of carrots and sticks are being held out, but the Trump administration does that with China, does that with Pakistan, with us, and with its allies. So I think we should bear this in mind and not jump to any conclusions at this point in time. We have a friendly government there. But in the case of Pakistan, they are going to give them a fairly long rope to try and see if they can get them to have a reason. But otherwise, again, here there are differences between state and the Pentagon. And the White House is very clear, whether everybody from Lisa Curtis to the president, that Pakistan is untrustworthy, full stop. So how this plays out is going to take time. There will be carrot, there will be stick. We have to wait and watch and build our relationship with the United States on its own. Let's not make it excessively Pakistan-centric, though in the case of China also, there is a carrot and stick which they use. So we should go on our own based on our own national interests in the years ahead. and in the months ahead even, but keeping in very close view what is happening there. But one thing is very clear, on terrorism within the US Congress, even senators who have been very pro-Pakistani in the past are angry.
Okay.
Because they don't like body bags coming back from Afghanistan. So let's see how the troop build-up takes place. But this will be more Pentagon than State Department run.
Okay, okay. Mr. Banerji, some reports claim Fazlur Rahman Khalil of the Harkatul Mujahideen, who in fact runs the Ansarul Ummah group, is in fact attempting to join mainstream politics. Perhaps legitimize their activities with the help of the military is what they are saying. In a situation like this, where, the government is, you don't know how it's functioning, what is happening, the military already has a bit of a control on how things run. The groups which are close to the military, even a Jamaat-ud-Dawa for that matter, has floated a political party, hasn't been recognized as yet. It gives, further more power to such groups to rise up. Do you agree?
Well, you see, Fazlur Rahman Khalil is a lesser player and he has been totally in the hands of the army. The bigger player is, of course, Hafiz Muhammad Saeed, the Jamaat-ud-Dawa man, and now also the Mumtaz Qadri group. Both these groups in Punjab in the recent elections in NA 120, Lahore, did fairly well. They got more votes than the PPP. So this is a process which the army has sort of blessed, and there are several reasons for it. Partly, you see, army is disillusioned with the performance of the mainstream politicians, the characters like Nawaz Sharif or even Imran Khan, who is so unpredictable. He's known as U-turn Khan, keeps changing his mind. And the PPP, of course, is not a force in Punjab. So in Punjab, they may want to legitimize the mainstreaming of these groups, not only because of the international pressure against them, but also because they would like to project that this is a group which is anti-sectarian. The Jamaat-ud-Dawa has never attacked Shias in Pakistan, or even the lesser minorities, Hindus or Christians. They reserve their ire only for Kafirs outside Pakistan. So this is something that suits the army. Okay. I mean, they would try to legitimize them and say that, everything is hunky-dory, they are so-called good terrorists who are no longer terrorists. And if at the point of their choosing they want to use them as a non-state sort of actor against India, they can still do that. So this is a process which could, in terms of domestic politics in Pakistan, lead to fragmentation of the political mandate in Pakistan, in Punjab especially. To come back to one other point which Professor Pant had raised, this process of using the judiciary to raise the hackles of the elites in Pakistan. I mean, this could have a boomerang effect. To have a credibility of this process, the judiciary has to be seen to be even-handed. And there is this question mark that will they really question the corruption of generals? Have they ever done it or succeeded in doing it? So this is a question which will come up. The political kleptocracy versus the mill bus, the interests of the military business elites in Pakistan. There may be a clash of this which may come forth in the process of indicting Nawaz Sharif, which would be something very interesting to watch.
All right, Mr. Parthasarathy, you agree with that?
Yeah,
is that
absolutely. You see, the case of the judiciary, let's be real. You are hauling up Nawaz Sharif for having properties in London. What about General Musharraf? Properties in London, properties in Dubai. What about General Kayani? Properties in Sydney. He is one step further. When Sydney, in Australia, it's the most expensive city along with Melbourne. So, where is the even-handedness? You are Musharraf. Anyway, you calculate even his general salary and all the property he acquired. I think some 18 properties he acquired in his career in the army. This is a bit far-fetched, and they will not act against the military. In fact, when they wanted to act against Musharraf at Nawaz's prodding, Raheel Sharif told them where the line ends and they better not do it. And they backed off.
Okay, okay. Professor Pant, that question again, of Jamaat-ud-Dawa rising as a political party, these kind of elements which are gaining more power under the military, it has been, of course, going on. It has been a part of, how Pakistan's politics has been so far. But the very fact that, you have a Jamaat-ud-Dawa that seems to be quite more vocal when it comes to trying to get into the political mainstream. How much of a worry is that for India then? Because you anyway want Pakistan to call it a terror organization, which is obviously not happening. But at the same time, they are entering politics. You may have to deal with them at some point. How does it work out for India?
Well, I think it is also partly a result of, I think, India's success in making this case to the world that, look, these groups are really very, very potent, and therefore they need to be dealt with as terrorist groups. And I think this growing isolation of Pakistan because of these groups is also now leading some of these groups to claim, well, let's move towards greater normalization as political entities.
Okay.
And that the sort of encroachment and that link with the military that they have had in the past leads you now to conclude that these elements may gain greater visibility, greater acceptance as normal actors in Pakistan's polity. So I think India has done well in terms of sending out the signal. Diplomatic isolation is important of Pakistan, and especially because these groups are operating in Pakistan with impunity. I think now, as they enter politics, as certain sections of the military may decide to bless certain sections of these groups, they may not do it very, very overtly, in terms of the larger organizations, but they may do it in terms of individuals. I think India will have to keep a careful watch in terms of who is entering into politics and how are they entering into politics, and the relationship that they have had with the military in the past will of course become even more clearer as time goes by, and so I think what we have done diplomatically perhaps is now leading to this situation which we now will have to encounter as months and days go by.
And how challenging is that then until the next elections, which we don't know how it's going to go, because so far, at least till a few months back, Maryam was in fact claiming that Nawaz Sharif is still a very big dominating force. But it seems like, at least the public sentiment as well is going against him with these indictments. How do you see 2018 playing out, the politics and, as a forward for India as well?
To say, I'm not sure, because nobody is sure. I'm not even sure within Pakistan, the military and the political parties are clear. There are too many uncertainties. But on the whole business of...
as far as Indo-Pak ties go.
Indo-Pak ties go, as I see it, nothing very, we will keep some contacts, which we always do, not necessarily in the public domain. That keeps going on, but I can't see a formal dialogue, and I'll tell you the reason. People don't understand. We resumed a formal dialogue after the attack on our parliament, only after we received a firm assurance from Musharraf, Mr. Vajpayee, that territory under Pakistan's control would not be used for terrorism against India. And let us also be very, very clear. In the period 2004 to 2007, by and large, that was observed. The LOC was not violated. The ceasefire held. But around 2008, when Musharraf weakened and Kayani came in, we miscalculated. When our embassy was attacked in Kabul, and I happened to be there a week later, it was very clear it was being done by the Haqqani network with the ISI report. And the moment you resumed dialogue, you got back to the whole tamasha. So yes, be nice, as the External Affairs Minister has said, on visas, on medical treatment. By all means, keep your own channels of contact open, avoid unnecessary rhetoric. But let's be under no illusion. One thing is, come December, the snows will come. Infiltration is bound to go up. So let's watch how the developments play out. The External Affairs Minister has spoken to the High Commissioner. Let's see how it goes from there.
Infiltration numbers, in fact,
but
and
a
ceasefire
structured
violations
dialogue,
are still quite worrying.
A structured dialogue, to my mind, right now it would be as bad as when we went in rushing after the Mumbai terrorist attack.
Do you agree, Mr. Banerji, that as far as India-Pakistan ties are concerned, things will be in a limbo of sorts? We'll
yes,
just continue.
Indeed, absolutely. There is not likely to be much change, but the possibilities of contacts remain. Whether there can be a new striking or opening of a track to process between some personalities. A lot would depend on the landmark situation of the ICJ verdict, which will come sometime in December on the Kulbhushan Jadhav case, how Pakistan reacts to the Indian position, what the court rules, how the army in Pakistan takes that decision. So these will be the imponderables which would sort of determine which way things will go. It's very uncertain.
Harsh, how do you see it going in the next few months, at least till the elections till the elections of Pakistan? How do we see that?
Well, I do see, I mean, this continuity prevailing, the present continuity prevailing over the next few months, at least because of the various aspects that were discussed earlier. But I also think that, we have been, at least New Delhi has been relatively successful in making a case to the world about the importance of isolating Pakistan. And I think the results are that we are looking at pressure from various countries, from various groups, including EU, America, and even Russia now looking very, very closely at what it wanted to achieve in Afghanistan. We have had recent visit of the Russian interlocutor to Afghanistan, to India. So I think we are looking at a regional and global landscape where perhaps Indian position is now well understood, and therefore I think India has been able to make a case that, look, this situation will continue unless Pakistan takes some tangible steps, which, because of the points that we were discussing today, it's unlikely that Pakistan would be able to take those steps that India wants it to take, given the civil military situation that is developing there, given the weakening of the civilian authorities, given the rise of the military once again. So I think we are again witnessing, we will continue to see this turbulence, partly because of what is happening within the domestic situation in Pakistan, and Pakistan, unless those dysfunctionalities are addressed domestically, it's very unlikely that there's going to be any rapprochement or even a movement towards some sort of a peace overture with Pakistan in that sense.
And finally, very quickly from the three of you, I'd like to know, what do you feel Nawaz Sharif's future seems like in politics? We've seen, of course, he had gone out of the picture completely, came back, bounced back, and in a way that no one could imagine. But do you think this is really the hardest times that he's probably faced?
Look, I was there when he was thrown out the last time, and everybody felt that this was it. He bounced back, but this time it is going to be much tougher because situations change. You have the factor of, quite obviously, the rift between the brothers, the competing ambitions of Mariam and Shehbaz's son. So things are going to be much more complicated. Let us see how they move towards an election in this situation. Everything is uncertain at this stage. Best thing, as I think we all agree, is let's not get too excited. Let's not start getting too rhetorical. Wait to watch the situation, because as Dr. Pant says, you have even persuaded China to join in naming Lashkar and others. That's thanks to the Russians in a certain measure. So we are moving ahead in a graduated manner, diplomatically. Let's stick to that process.
Okay. Mr. Banerji, now Nawaz Sharif has this added thing of a corruption case, and a lot of them against him, and that is going to put further pressure on him to try and bounce back in politics.
It's going to be very difficult for him to come back from this situation, though corruption in itself, in the ethos of Pakistan, is not such a big deal. But there are other factors which will militate against his comeback. The army will still like to have a facade of a democratic process going for a while. So they would be happy to deal with the present lot, who have, the present Prime Minister has a strong personal army connections, defense service connections. His father was in the Air Force. His wife is the daughter of an ISI general. So things like that matter a lot amongst the Pakistani elites. So they may like to keep the facade of democracy intact, but a lot would depend on how the factional infighting within the PMLN unfolds.
Professor?
I think I basically agree. I think it would much would depend on how the factionalism within the PML unfolds, and how I think Nawaz Sharif reacts to that. But I think it's going to be very tough for him. Although in Pakistani politics we should never say never. So I think he may just we might end up seeing him again.
And how much of a factor is Imran Khan? Is he a factor at all in the 2018 elections?
Look, I think there are signs of the army finding that he's too erratic.
Okay.
And Imran was a creature of the army. To be precise, he was mentored by well before Shuja Pasha, by the earlier ISI DGs. So let's wait and watch for him. But if the army pulls the plug, then which one can't see, and as you're saying, you're going to end into a very dysfunctional, complicated political situation.
Okay.
Which would suit the army fine.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen, Mr. Parthasarathy, Mr. Banerji, and Professor Pant for joining me here on India's World. That's all we have time for the moment. Thank you so much for joining us.